My name is Cordelia, and I've been working the night shift at County General for 8 years now. Most people think I'm crazy for choosing the graveyard hours, but honestly, I prefer the quiet. Less chaos, fewer administrators breathing down your neck, and the pay differential doesn't hurt either. Plus, after dealing with entitled day shift doctors for so long, the oddball night crew feels like family. But some nights, I wonder if the extra money is worth it. It was a Tuesday in October when everything changed. I remember because Tuesday nights are usually dead. No pun intended. People seem to save their emergencies for weekends, like they're planning their heart attacks around their social calendars. The ER was practically empty except for old Mr. Henderson sleeping off another bender in bed 3 and a college kid getting stitches after what he claimed was a skateboarding accident, but looked suspiciously like a bar fight. I was catching up on paperwork when the automatic doors slid open with that familiar whoosh. The sound echoed through the empty waiting room, which should have been my first clue that something was off. Usually you hear footsteps, voices, maybe a wheelchair squeaking. This time there was just silence. Then I saw him. An elderly man shuffled through the doors wearing a faded hospital gown that had seen better days. His feet were bare, pale as paper, and left wet prints on the linoleum. That struck me as odd since it hadn't rained in weeks. His silver hair was disheveled, sticking up at odd angles like he'd just woken up, and his eyes had that distant look you sometimes see in patients with dementia. "Excuse me," he said, his voice paper-thin but surprisingly clear. "I need to visit my daughter. She's in room 237. I looked up from my charts, already reaching for the visitor log. "I'm sorry, sir, but visiting hours ended at 9. You'll have to come back tomorrow morning." He shook his head slowly, water dripping from his gown onto the floor. No, you don't understand. She's been waiting for me. Room 237. I promised I'd come. Something cold crawled up my spine. Room 237. I knew that number, though I couldn't immediately place why it seemed familiar. "Let me just check our patient roster," I said, pulling up the computer system. There was no one in room 237. In fact, according to the system, there was no room 237 at all in our current wing configuration. "Sir, I think there might be some confusion. We don't have a room 237 in this hospital. Are you sure you have the right?" "Of course you have room 237. His voice cracked with frustration. "She's been there for weeks. Elena Martinez. She's been waiting for me to bring her home." Elena Martinez. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it, with such desperate certainty, made my chest tighten. I glanced around the empty ER, hoping to catch sight of Jerry, our night security guard, but he was probably doing his rounds in the parking garage. "Sir, what's your name? Are you a patient here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and started walking toward the elevator bank, his bare feet slapping wetly against the floor. Those water prints were getting bigger, I noticed, as if he was somehow getting wetter as he moved. "Sir, wait." I called after him, but he'd already pressed the elevator button. The doors opened immediately, which was weird because our elevators were notoriously slow, especially at night. I should have called security. I should have followed protocol. But something about the old man's desperate certainty pulled at me. Plus, room 237 was nagging at the back of my mind like a song I couldn't quite remember. I quickly signed out at the nurse's station and followed him into the elevator. He'd pressed a button for the second floor, which made sense. Room numbers in the 200s would be on the second floor. But as we rode up in silence, I noticed the temperature in the elevator car dropping. My breath started coming out in small puffs. "Is the air conditioning broken?" I asked, more to break the uncomfortable silence than anything else. He looked at me with those distant eyes. "She gets so cold," he whispered. I should have brought her more blankets. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened onto the second floor. But this wasn't the second floor I knew. The hallway stretched out in front of us, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights that cast strange shadows on the walls. The familiar smell of hospital disinfectant was there, but underneath it was something else. Something damp and musty, like a basement that hadn't been aired out in years. Room numbers lined the walls, 201, 203, 205, but they looked different somehow. Older, the paint was peeling, and some of the numbers hung at odd angles. "This way," the old man said, turning left down a corridor I'd never seen before. I followed, my nursing shoes squeaking on the wet linoleum. "Sir, I don't think—" "Here," he said, stopping in front of a door marked 237. The number was barely hanging on, held by a single screw. "She's in here." The door was different from the others, older, with a heavy wooden frame, instead of the modern metal ones throughout the rest of the hospital. And it was locked. Not just locked, but sealed, with yellow tape across the frame that looked like it had been there for decades. "Sir, this room is sealed." "We can't." But he was already pushing open the door, the old tape tearing like tissue paper. The smell hit me first. Not the usual hospital smell, but something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The room beyond was dark, except for a shaft of moonlight coming through a cracked window. And there, on the single bed in the center of the room, was a patient, a woman middle-aged, with dark hair spread across a yellowed pillow. Her hands were folded over her chest, and she was so still I thought she must be sleeping. But there was something about the stillness that wasn't natural. It was the absolute stillness of death. Fresh flowers sat on the bedside table. White roses, their petals perfect and dewy, as if they'd just been cut. "Elena," the old man whispered, moving toward the bed. "I'm here, Mija. I told you I'd come." I backed toward the door, my heart hammering. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. The sealed room, the impossible patient, the flowers that couldn't exist. "Sir, we need to leave. This room—" "Has been waiting," he finished, turned to look at me. And that's when I saw his hospital bracelet, faded and water-stained but still legible. Martinez Fernando. Admitted, October 15th, 1987. Deceased, October 15th, 1987. The same date that was written on the chart, clipped to the foot of Elena's bed. "She's been so cold," he said again, reaching out to touch the woman's face. "But now I can take her home." I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, the room was empty. No bed, no patient, no flowers. Just dust and shadows and the overwhelming smell of mildew. The only light came from a single broken window, its glass scattered on the floor. But the flowers were still there, sitting on a windowsill that hadn't existed a moment before. White roses, fresh as morning dew. I ran, down the hallway that suddenly looked normal again, past room numbers that made sense, into an elevator that was working perfectly. When I reached the ER, Jerry was waiting for me, looking concerned. "Cordelia, where'd you go? I saw you talking to some old guy. Then you both just disappeared." "You saw him?" "Yeah, on the security monitors. Guy in a hospital gown, soaking wet. Weird thing, though. The camera lost him after he got in the elevator with you. Like he just vanished. Later, after my shift ended and I could barely keep my eyes open, I went to the hospital record department. I had to know. Fernando Martinez, age 74, admitted October 15th, 1987, following a car accident. Died of complications 3 hours after admission. Survived by daughter Elena Martinez, age 45, who died in the same accident but was pronounced dead on arrival. Room 237 had been sealed in 1987 after a gas leak killed 3 patients. It had never been reopened. But every Tuesday since then, around 2:47 a.m., I find fresh white roses on the windowsill of a room that doesn't exist. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear 2 voices talking softly in the darkness, a father and daughter, finally going home together. I still work the night shift at County General. The pay's good, and somebody has to watch over the living. But I also watch over the dead, because sometimes love doesn't end when the heart stops beating. Sometimes it just gets a little lost, wandering hospital hallways in the dark, looking for a way home. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to listen, it finds exactly what it's been searching for. Story 2. I'm Thaddeus, and I've been working nights in the ER at St. Mary's Hospital for 12 years. In that time, I've seen pretty much everything. Overdoses, shootings, heart attacks, car wrecks that would make your stomach turn. You develop a thick skin after a while, learn to compartmentalize a horror so you can function. But there's one case that still keeps me up during the day when I'm supposed to be sleeping. It started on a Tuesday night in March. I remember because March is usually our busy season. Spring break accidents, people getting stupid after being cooped up all winter. But this particular Tuesday was unusually quiet. I was catching up on some continuing education modules when the ambulance bay doors burst open. "We've got a priority 1 coming in," shouted Martinez, one of our regular paramedics. "Single vehicle accident. 26-year-old female, multiple trauma." They wheeled her in fast, the gurney's wheels squeaking against linoleum. The woman was young, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair matted with blood. Her face was a mess. Lacerations across her forehead, a nasty gash on her left cheek. But what struck me most were her eyes. Even through the pain and confusion, they were desperately searching the room. "My baby," she kept saying, gripping my scrub top with surprising strength. "Where's my baby?" "She's still in the car. You have to get her out of the car." "Ma'am, what's your name?" I asked, trying to assess her injuries while she thrashed on the gurney. "Isabella," she gasped. "Isabella Martinez. My daughter Sophia. She's only 8 months old. She was in her car seat in the back. Please, you have to send someone." Dr. Harrison stepped in then. "All business. Let's get her trauma too. CBC, type and cross, portable chest x-ray. And someone call the scene if there's an infant involved we need to know." I stayed with Isabella while the trauma team worked. She had a punctured lung, possible internal bleeding, and a head injury that had us all worried. But she wouldn't stop talking about her baby, wouldn't let us sedate her until someone confirmed Sophia was safe. Martinez pulled me aside about 20 minutes later. "Hey, Thaddeus?" I called the scene. No baby in the car. No car seat either. Just a woman. "That can't be right," I said. "She's adamant." "Head injury," Martinez shrugged. "Makes people confused. Happens all the time." But Isabella wasn't confused, even as her condition deteriorated. Even as her vitals started crashing, she kept giving us detailed descriptions of her daughter. Sophia's exact weight, her favorite stuffed animal, the pink onesie she was wearing. These weren't the ramblings of someone with a brain injury. These were the desperate words of a mother. 17 minutes after arrival, Isabella coded. We worked on her for 30 minutes, but the internal bleeding was too severe. Right before she flatlined, she grabbed my wrist with what little strength she had left and whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Highway 34, mile marker 67. She's still waiting for me." Those were her last words. I thought that was the end of it. Tragic, but nothing I hadn't seen before. We get head trauma patients all the time who talk about family members that don't exist, places that aren't real. The mind does strange things when it's injured. But then the next Tuesday rolled around. Same time, 3:33 a.m. exactly. Same ambulance crew. Same woman. Isabella Martinez, 26 years old, car accident victim with multiple trauma. Same injuries, same desperate pleas about her baby Sophia. Same pink onesie, same stuffed animal, same everything. I stood frozen in the trauma bay, watching this impossible replay unfold. Dr. Harrison was working on her just like before, ordering the same tests, making the same observations. But he acted like he'd never seen her before. "Martinez," I called out to the paramedic. "Didn't we have this exact same patient last week?" He looked at me like I was crazy. "What are you talking about? First time I've seen her." Isabella's eyes found mine across the room. "You," she said, pointing a bloody finger my direction. "You were here before. You remember, don't you? My baby Sophia. She's still in the car." "Ma'am, there was no baby at the scene." Martinez said, the same line he'd given me the week before. And just like before, 17 minutes after arrival, Isabella coded. Just like before, we couldn't save her. And just like before, her final words were those coordinates. Highway 34, mile marker 67. This time, though, I wrote them down. After my shift ended, I drove out to Highway 34. It's a lonely stretch of road about 40 minutes from the hospital, mostly farmland and empty fields. Mile marker 67 was easy to find. It was the only one with flowers around it, fresh flowers, and a small wooden cross. I got out of my car and walked over to the memorial. The inscription made my hands shake. Isabella Martinez, 26, and Sofia Martinez, 8 months. Taken too soon. September 15th. September 15th. 6 months ago. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found when I looked closer at the accident scene. Skid marks on the asphalt, still visible after all this time. And there, about 20 feet from the road, hidden in the tall grass, was a pink onesie, a baby's pink onesie, exactly like Isabella had described. I called the police when I got home, told them about the memorial, the skid marks, the baby clothes. The officer who took my call was patient, but clearly thought I was losing it. Sir, we investigated that accident thoroughly. Single occupant vehicle. No infant was ever reported missing. The woman had suffered a miscarriage about 3 months before the accident. Maybe that's what she was confused about. But I knew better. I'd seen the desperation in Isabella's eyes, the absolute certainty of a mother who knew her child was in danger. Whatever had happened on that road, Sofia Martinez had been in that car. The third Tuesday, I was ready. I'd done my research, talked to some of the older nurses who'd been around longer. Turns out, unexplained repeat cases weren't as rare as you'd think. Sometimes, when someone dies with unfinished business, especially something involving family, they get stuck in a loop. When Isabella came through those doors again, same time, same injuries, same desperate pleas, I made a decision that probably violated every protocol in the book. Instead of letting her code, instead of watching her die again, I leaned down close to her ear and whispered, "Isabella, Sofia is safe. She's not in the car anymore. Someone already got her out." The change was immediate. Her thrashing stopped. Her breathing, which had been rapid and panicked, slowed to something more normal. For the first time in 3 weeks, she looked directly at me with clear, focused eyes. "She's safe?" Isabella whispered. "She's safe." I lied. "Sofia is with your mother. She's warm and fed and sleeping peacefully." Isabella smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. "Thank you," she said. I was so scared she was cold. Then she did something that made my blood freeze. She gripped my wrist, not with the desperate strength of a dying woman, but with the deliberate pressure of someone who was fully conscious and aware. "Thank you for helping me let go," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "But now you've seen too much, Thaddeus. Now you know the truth about what happened on that road." I blinked and she was gone. Not dead, gone. The gurney was empty. The monitors showing flat lines that had never actually registered patient. Dr. Harrison was standing there looking confused, asking where the trauma patient had gone. "What patient?" Martinez asked. "We didn't bring anyone in." But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew what Isabella had meant. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, hear sounds that weren't quite there. But it wasn't until the following Tuesday that I understood what Isabella had meant about seeing too much. That's when I heard for the first time a baby crying. It started soft, almost like white noise you might dismiss as the building settling or the ventilation system acting up. But as the weeks went on, it got louder, more insistent. And it only happened during my shifts, always around 3:33 a.m. The other staff couldn't hear it. When I asked Dr. Harrison about the crying, he suggested I might be experiencing some delayed stress from working nights for so long. When I mentioned it to the other nurses, they exchanged those looks that said they thought I was losing it. But I know what I hear every Tuesday night. It's Sofia Martinez, 8 months old, crying for her mother. She's still out there on Highway 34, still waiting in that car that no one else can see, getting colder and more frightened as the nights go by. Isabella found peace when I told her Sofia was safe. But I lied, and now I'm paying the price. Because Sofia isn't safe. She's still there, still waiting, and now she knows I can hear her. Last Tuesday, the crying was so loud I couldn't concentrate on my patients. I ended up driving out to mile marker 67 again, standing in that empty field at 4 a.m., listening to an infant's cries that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the darkness. "I don't know how to help you." The crying stopped for a moment, and in that silence, I heard something else. Isabella's voice carried on the wind. "Find her, Thaddeus. She's so cold. Please find her and bring her home. I'm still working nights at St. Mary's. I have to. Someone needs to listen for Sophia's cries, to keep trying to solve this puzzle that began on a dark highway 6 months ago. But I'm running out of time. Each Tuesday, the crying gets louder, more desperate, and I'm starting to see things in the shadows of the hospital corridors. A woman, in a blood-stained dress, walking the halls, searching for something she'll never find. Isabella Martinez isn't at peace. She won't be until her daughter is safe. And neither will I, because once you hear a baby cry in the darkness, once you know that cry is real, you can't ever stop listening. You can't ever stop try to bring them home. Story 3. My name is Persephone. Yes, like the goddess. And yes, I've heard all the jokes about death and the underworld. Trust me, after 15 years working nights in the ER at Memorial Hospital, the irony isn't lost on me. But nothing could prepare me for what I witnessed last month, or for the choice I had to make that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. It started when Marcus joined our night crew. He was quiet, maybe mid-30s, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of pale skin that suggested he'd been working nights his whole life. What struck me most about him wasn't his appearance, though. It was how cold he always seemed. Even in the middle of summer, Marcus wore long sleeves and kept his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "New orderly," explained Janet, our night supervisor, when she introduced him. "Just transferred from St. Vincent's downtown. Comes highly recommended." Marcus nodded politely but didn't shake hands when I offered. His smile seemed genuine enough, but something about his eyes bothered me. They were too knowing, too old for his face, like he'd seen things that had aged him from the inside out. The first sign something was different came during his second week. I was treating a motorcycle accident victim, a kid, maybe 19, who'd wrapped his bike around a tree. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, the works. We were looking at hours of surgery, maybe weeks of recovery if he was lucky. Marcus was helping me get the patient prepped for transport when he accidentally brushed his bare hand against the kid's arm. Just for a second, skin-to-skin contact through a tear in the boy's leather jacket. The change was immediate. The kid's breathing, which had been labored and weak, suddenly strengthened. His color improved right before my eyes, going from that gray pallor shock to something closer to normal. When we got him to surgery, Dr. Chin was amazed at how stable his vitals were. "Lucky kid," Chin said afterward. "Those injuries should have killed him, but somehow he's responding better than I've ever seen." But I'd noticed something else. After Marcus touched the patient, his own skin had looked even paler, almost translucent, and when he breathed, I could swear I saw frost forming in the air, even though the hospital was kept at a steady 72 degrees. I started paying closer attention after that. Over the next few weeks, I watched Marcus work with an increasing sense of unease. Every patient he came into extended contact with showed miraculous improvements. A woman with acute appendicitis who should have needed emergency surgery suddenly stabilized enough for outpatient treatment. An elderly man having a heart attack responded to medication that had failed twice before. But there was a pattern I couldn't ignore. The patients Marcus helped, the ones who recovered so dramatically, they all woke up talking about the same thing. It was so cold, they'd whisper, their eyes wide with terror they couldn't quite explain. Like winter had gotten inside my bones. And there was something else. Something that took me weeks to piece together. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Every miraculous recovery came with a cost. Not to the patient Marcus helped, but to someone else in the hospital. Mrs. Rodriguez in room 312 made a full recovery from pneumonia after Marcus accidentally bumped into her wheelchair. 2 days later, Mr. Foster down the hall, who'd been stable with the same condition, suddenly took a turn for the worse and died in his sleep. Tommy Chin recovered from his motorcycle injuries faster than anyone had expected. That same week, A 20-year-old college student came in with minor injuries from a fender bender and inexplicably developed complications that put him in intensive care. I started keeping notes, tracking the correlations. Every time Marcus's healing touch saved someone else of similar age and condition would deteriorate. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, calculated. I should have reported it immediately. Should have gone to Janet or Dr. Chun with my suspicions. But what was I supposed to say? That our new orderly was somehow stealing life force from patients? That he was trading death like baseball cards? Instead, I did something that probably saved my life. I started following him. 3 weeks after I'd begun documenting the pattern, I stayed late after my shift, hiding in the supply closet near the elevator bank. Marcus usually left around 7 a.m., but that morning, he didn't head for the parking garage. Instead, he took the elevator down to the basement. I waited 5 minutes, then followed. The basement level of Memorial Hospital is a maze of storage rooms, maintenance areas, and a morgue. I've been down there plenty of times over the years. Sometimes we had to retrieve supplies or escort families to identify bodies. But I'd never been down there alone at 7 in the morning, when the entire building felt empty and hollow. I followed the sound of Marcus's footsteps through the corridors, staying far enough back that he wouldn't hear me. The fluorescent lights down there were older, flickering occasionally and casting strange shadows on the walls. My footsteps echoed despite my efforts to stay quiet. The sound led me to the morgue. Through the small window in the door, I could see Marcus standing in the center of the room, surrounded by the metal tables where we kept bodies before autopsies or pick up by funeral homes. But he wasn't alone. Every table was occupied, not unusual in itself. We're a major trauma center, and death is a constant companion. What was unusual was what Marcus was doing. His hands were glowing, not metaphorically, literally glowing with a sickly blue-white light that pulsed like a heartbeat. He moved from table to table, placing his hands on each covered form, and as he touched them, the light grew brighter, and the bodies moved. I watched in horror as corpses began to twitch under their sheets. An arm here, a leg there, small movements at first, then more pronounced. One of the sheets fell away, revealing the face of Mrs. Patterson, who died 2 days earlier from a stroke. Her eyes snapped open, milky white and unfocused, but definitely aware. Marcus looked up then, and his eyes met mine through the window. They were completely black now, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like looking into deep water at night. "Hello, Persephone," he said, though the glass between us should have muffled his voice. Instead, it sounded like he was speaking directly into my ear. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." I ran. Behind me, I heard the morgue door slam open, followed by sounds I still have nightmares about. Wet, sliding noises, footsteps that shuffled and dragged. And underneath it all, Marcus's voice, calm and conversational. "You can't run from this, Persephone. You've seen too much now. You understand what I do, how necessary it is." I made it to the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Behind me, the sounds were getting closer, not just Marcus's footsteps, but others, many others. "Death isn't permanent." His voice echoed up the stairwell, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "It's just potential energy. I'm simply redirecting it, giving it purpose. The young man with a motorcycle accident gets to live, to love, to have children. Mrs. Patterson gets to serve a greater purpose than rotting in the ground." I burst through the stairwell door onto the main floor, expecting to find the usual morning bustle of shift change. Instead, the hospital was eerily quiet. The hallways were empty, the nurses' stations abandoned. Even the constant background noise of monitors and ventilators had stopped. "Where is everyone?" I whispered to myself. "Gone." Marcus's voice answered from directly behind me. "I sent them away. They don't need to see this." I spun around to find him standing there, looking perfectly normal except for those black, bottomless eyes. Behind him, stretching down the hallway, was a crowd of figures in hospital gowns and morgue sheets. Men, women, children, all the people who had died at Memorial Hospital over the past month. They moved with that same shuffling gait I'd heard in the basement, but their attention was focused entirely on me. I could feel the cold radiating off them, see my breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. "I don't kill people, Persephone," Marcus said, taking a step closer. "I redistribute death, balance the scales. Some people deserve more life than others. Some people deserve less." "You're insane," I managed to say, backing toward the emergency exit. "Am I?" He tilted his head, almost curious. "Tell me, when you save a child's life in the ER, don't you sometimes wish you could have saved them by giving their injuries to a child molester instead? When a good person dies and an evil one lives, don't you ever think about how unfair it is?" He was right, and that terrified me more than anything else. There had been times, dark moments during particularly bad nights, when I'd wished I could trade one patient's death for another's life, when I'd seen monsters walk away from accidents that killed saints. "The difference," Marcus continued, "is that I can actually do something about it. I can make the hard choices that need to be made." The circle of the dead was closing around me now. I could see their faces more clearly. Some I recognized from recent losses. Others were older, their features more decomposed. They reached toward me with cold, grasping fingers. "Join us, Persephone," Marcus said. "Help me decide who lives and who dies. Help me balance the scales." I thought about running, but there was nowhere to go. I thought about fighting, but what do you do against an army of the dead? Then I remembered something. My name, Persephone, goddess of the underworld, queen of the dead. "No," I said, and my voice carried more authority than I'd ever heard from myself before. "You don't get to decide. Death makes its own choices." For the first time, Marcus looked uncertain. The dead around me paused in their advance. "I've seen enough death to know it doesn't play favorites," I continued, stepping forward instead of back. "Good people die, bad people live, and sometimes it's random and unfair and horrible, but that's not for us to fix." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I cut him off. "You're afraid of death, so you're trying to control it. But death isn't something you can redirect or redistribute. It just is." Marcus's black eyes flickered, showing hints of their original color. Around us, the dead began to waver, their forms becoming less solid. "Let them go," I said. "Let them rest." For a moment, I thought he might fight me. The air in the hallway grew so cold I could see ice forming on the walls. Then Marcus closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were human. The dead around us sighed as one, a sound like wind through autumn leaves, and then they were gone. Not dramatically, they simply faded away, finally allowed to find peace. Marcus looked at me one last time. "You could have had such power," he said sadly. Then he walked toward the emergency exit and disappeared into the morning light. I never saw him again. When the other staff returned, none of them remembering where they'd been or why they'd left, I told them Marcus had quit without notice. The miraculous recovery stopped, but so did the mysterious deaths. I still work nights at Memorial Hospital. Someone has to watch over the boundary between life and death, to make sure people like Marcus don't try to play God with forces they don't understand. But sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I wonder if I made the right choice. I think about all the people Marcus could have saved, all the good that might have come from his terrible gift. Then I remember the eyes of the dead as they finally found peace, and I know that some prices are too high to pay, even for the power to decide who lives and who dies. Death will make its own choices, and sometimes that has to be enough.